Hi, I'm Julian.
And I'm Billy, and you're listening to the Lapsus Podcast.
Tonight, we're going to be talking about negligible senescence.
Which is a phenomenon in nature, a biological trait whereby some organisms out there exhibit no observable signs of aging, which renders them effectively immortal.
That sounds like a pretty darn desirable trait, doesn't it?
Yeah, and there are some scientists out there who would agree with you, and it may be that the first human to live to 1,000 years old may have already been born.
And a friendly reminder to our listeners, if the sound of bottles opening and beer swilling invades your listening experience, do not fret. This is a regular and essential part of the program.
So let's begin.
The experiment requires you to continue teaching. Please.
What is there in human nature that allows an individual to act without any restraints whatsoever?
In this setting, I willingly expose my throat to a man with a razor blade.
Alcohol is a potential menace to community safety as well as to his personal health.
There are creatures out there. There are organisms out there in wild grassy plains and on the tops of mountains and deep beneath the coastline of Japan that they go about normal business like any other organism would. You know, they eat things and they reproduce and they grow. But the thing is, they've got this thing about them called negligible senescence, where growing does not affect their likelihood to die at all. They are statistically no more likely to die at any given age once they've reached maturity, once they've reached adulthood, than they would at any other age. This is unlike humans, of course, who get to like 80 years old, 70 years old, and we develop all sorts of nasty degenerative diseases, and we just can't fend for ourselves anymore.
We accumulate damage, don't we, from various like infections and diseases and that sort of thing, and we can't stop them from basically aging.
That's right.
Yeah, the aging, yeah.
Our body just gets old, it starts fucking up, and it's the same with many creatures, many mammals. You know, like the lions get old and die, and they're no longer the pride of the pack and all that and what have you, and so have not. And but as I said, there are some creatures out there who just they don't do this. Their biochemistry is just wired differently to ours, so that they don't have to start deteriorating. They just exist. And the only reason they do end up dying is because there are organisms bigger than them that have an interest in eating them. But if that weren't to happen across their lifespan, they would, at any given age, once they'd reach adulthood, they would be just as good functionally as they were when they were young.
But it's not only predators, obviously, that can kill them. It's still disease and that sort of thing. It's just that they're not affected by...
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Their age isn't part of why they die.
Exactly. Like, I mean, they can still get infected by something. They can still have terrible accidents where they fall down a cliff and then they're fucked from there on in. For instance, there's this turtle that lives in North America. It's a pretty smart looking thing. It's got a glossy black shell with yellow spots on it and a yellow underside. This turtle, the Belandings turtle, it lives in North America, and scientists have been studying this thing, and this turtle exhibits what they call negligible senescence. If you look at the turtle, if you give it a good once-over at 20 years old, from a cellular and health point of view, this thing is just as strapping and capable as it was at 20 years old as it will be at 70 years old. They've done the comparisons. It doesn't age. It's just as good. And it may even be that at 70 years old, the turtle has by now become more like street smart, like wiser at knowing where to nest and where to hunt and how to meet lady and dude turtles for copulation.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Because even some of these creatures don't even suffer any loss in like reproductive capabilities.
Oh yeah.
And in some cases, like revert back to like sexual immaturity,
yes.
which is really strange. It can be like an indefinite thing that they just mature and then demature and then mature again.
The immortal jellyfish, the one creature out there that's been observed to show what the men and women in white lab coats call transdifferentiation, which is where cells have the capacity to totally change what they do. And as Julian was saying, this immortal jellyfish, or the Turritopsis doornii, which is you can find it along the coastline of Japan. This thing, people call it the Benjamin Button jellyfish because it can revert back to its polyp stage, its childlike stage.
Yeah.
It can be a fully grown jellyfish and then start going backwards. If it gets stressed out, all of its cells start metamorphosizing themselves back to different sorts of cells. So the jellyfish changes the phase of life that it's in to go back to a younger child version of itself. And this process takes a few days. And then it just starts growing again. It starts growing back to an adult, and then, once it needs to again, or once it's stressed out, if there's something it doesn't like in the environment, maybe there's not enough food, it just converts itself back to a baby and starts life over again.
One life, like a thread of gold, may run through the forest tapestry and tie 1,000 patterns into one.
And there was once a clam who was named Ming. Ming the clam, it lived to 507. We called it Ming because it was born in the Ming dynasty of 16th century China. A 507-year-old clam.
How did it die?
We killed it. Right now, dear listener, you may be thinking, great golly geese of all the creatures to be aware of their own mortality, their own inevitable demise, their death. Humans weren't given negligible senescence. I mean, what a rip-off. We got to be the ones who are constantly worrying about their own death every single day, where there are jellyfish out there who wouldn't care less if they were going to die next week. They'd get to live forever.
We do not know if now may be too late to mend the fabric we nearly destroyed.
Julian, who is Aubrey de Grey?
Dr. Aubrey de Grey, a former professor at Cambridge University and frontman of the SENS Research Foundation, or Strategies for Engineered Negligible Senescence, says that age is a disease and the goal is to cure it.
Interesting. Engineered negligible senescence. That sounds both juicy and promising. Yeah, what Julian said is pretty much it. Like, Aubrey de Grey reconceptualizes aging itself as a disease. He looks at degenerative disease, which is responsible for 2/3 of all death in the Western world. Like cardiovascular disease, certain cancers, and osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, Alzheimer's. These things, they just come about as a natural byproduct of being alive in the first place. So the way Aubrey sees it is that they don't have to come about. That if you reconceptualize age as a disease, and then if you target your medical intervention to age itself, you will effectively cure degenerative disease and cure aging.
Well, it's ambitious, isn't it? It's basically they want to stop aging in its tracks so that the human body can't accumulate the damage that causes aging in the first place.
Well, yeah, that's totally it. I mean, the human body, in order to keep us ticking, its ability, colourful fruit salad of chemical reactions. Like, there's so much shite going on in the human body every single day. All these complicated electrochemical interactions, and you get spillage. You get stuff going wrong. Like proteins get glued together, and you get cells essentially handcuffed in places they shouldn't, and you get bits of junk, like warped and mutated bits of shite inside cells that your lysosomes can't dispose of themselves like they normally would, and I mean, on a day-to-day basis, it's a minuscule effect, but over the decades, it builds up and stuff goes wrong. Things just stop working properly, and you can see it. You can see it. You can see people getting wrinkly and their vision starting to break down, and their hair going grey and falling out, and their hearing going all wonky, and eventually it happens to the mind. Like the mind stops working. You stop being able to think properly. As the Spanish director Luis Buñuel said, "I can only wait for the final amnesia, the one that would erase a lifetime." Neatly, this leads us to the real juice behind this point, beyond the medical field, which is if you remedy aging, if you stop humans from aging, they have no reason to die. They effectively become just like the jellyfish, immortal.
The forest is full of riches, a treasury, a tapestry of beauty and life.
And that's why Julian and I know about this guy. Like, that's what's made Aubrey de Grey, the front man of this whole movement, essentially, so widely known. You know, he's got a great big bushy beard. He uses, colourful language. He makes these wild gesticulations, and he gets on stage and tells everybody that immortality is at our doorstep. Aubrey de Grey and his whole SENS program estimate that if we really applied ourselves to this kind of research, then our own negligible senescence, our own immortality, could be as close as 2030, less than 15 years away. I mean, obviously, they're pretty profound claims. It's not every day you get some dude up on stage telling you that immortality is right around the corner.
All humans and readers and consumers become sort of like entranced by the idea of immortality.
Absolutely, like immortality has been like making humans go starry-eyed for thousands of years. Like you had that Chinese emperor at one point who drank mercury because his alchemist told him it would prolong life. From day one of science, immortality has been a thing that we've dug on, and now you've got this dude peddling the dream. So of course, it's going to raise eyebrows. And right from the beginning, he's had his critics. Other gerontologists question not only the soundness of his science, but also the scientific nature of his motives. I wrote an article about this for Lapsus and did a fair bit of spooling, reading through journal articles and other things. And that's how they swung punches at each other, through getting published in journal articles. Aubrey de Grey and gerontologists bickering, essentially, attacking each other's logic and
It was like a journal article beef.
Yeah, it was. It was a journal article beef. And the funny thing was, it's really difficult to tell who is right, who is correct, because these other gerontologists, they pick at Aubrey. They pick at his like the lack of scientific evidence he's got to back up his claims, and like sort of and take little jabs at his logic here and there, and Aubrey rebuts with a fairly similar argument. Like they both parties argue against each other with colourful metaphors and flamboyant language, and they pick and choose which parts of arguments they'd like to argue, or they misrepresent arguments, like the whole straw man fallacy thing, and argue against that misrepresentation instead. And they're arguing like politicians. So when Aubrey says that these scientists don't know genius when they see it, and they have the inability to think outside the box, and compares himself to the man who was burnt for saying that the Earth orbits around the sun, it's difficult to know what to think.
Even myself, I feel sometimes watching Aubrey, like, is this guy like he's just selling like a miracle potion for the fountain of youth or whatever? It is hard to not be skeptical about his ideas. There is the chance that if you are on that side of things, you are the person who doesn't know genius when you see it. Maybe he does have the right idea. I mean, the 7 signs of aging that he talks about, like, they are good ideas. It's just maybe just a little bit controversial.
Theoretically, it's totally plausible. Like they have identified the specific biological mechanisms of aging, and if you can stop that, then you do stop aging. And I think the point of differences between Aubrey and the other gerontologists is that Aubrey reckons that if we just applied ourselves and like got on with it and put, importantly, some money into this, then we could have this real quick. We could have it by 2030. But the other gerontologists think that he's not, this isn't even bloody worthy of academic discussion.
Well, so much so that they even offered a reward to somebody who could bring him down.
Aubrey offered a reward, essentially.
Yeah, $20,000.
Yeah, it was in like 2005, I think. Aubrey's Methuselah Foundation was co-founded by Aubrey de Grey. It offered $20,000 to whichever bunch of scientists could prove once and for all that strategies for engineered negligible senescence were so based in quackery and so implausible that it wasn't even worthy of academic debate.
And guess what?
Nobody won. Nobody won this competition.
Another dawn may bring another chance to live.
One of the concerns of gerontologists back then was that Aubrey was making them look bad, essentially, was tarnishing the name of gerontology. Gerontology is an emerging science. Gerontology, by the way, is the study of aging, the biological mechanism of aging.
And they didn't want some bushy beard guy promising, immortality to be bringing it down as some sort of like kooky field of not even science. I could assume that they would have felt like he was casting gerontology in some sort of like massively skeptical light.
Exactly. He's like, I mean, you could look at it as him pulling it back to wizardry and alchemy, peddling immortality, and some of these gerontologists had real good stuff to offer, and they need their reputation for securing research grants and just elevating themselves and the work they do into a better spotlight. And their concern was that if you've got this guy in the papers, and if you plaster his name and his writings and speakings into journal articles, you make it just end up looking ridiculous. Because of the nature of the claim and because of what they said was unsound research and poor argument. And this is a common thing with emerging sciences. Like psychology had to deal with it too. They had to kick and scream and claw their way from a questionable reputation to finally be considered as a proper grown-up science. Yeah.
One of the problems that his peers in gerontology have with him is perhaps the fact that he appears to be in it for the money or funding.
The funding, yeah. I mean, as Aubrey himself says, a lot of the research they're conducting right now in the 7 areas they've broken down, these 7 areas of specific biological mechanisms of aging that they've broken down, it's proof of concept research.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the research, the preliminary step to actually running trials of curing degenerative disease, which means there's still a long way to go. It still means you've got to get the research done. You've got to get the grants. You've got to get the bolster your numbers, essentially. So right now, as you can imagine, a lot of what the work SENS has to do, a lot of Aubrey de Grey's energy is spent procuring investors.
Yeah.
Trying to get that cash to bolster the cause, to further the movement.
And when you get into that game, it's sort of hard not to appear as the guy that's selling snake oil.
Well, yeah. I mean, my article on Lapsus is about the 1,000-year-old man, and this podcast itself is called The I Word. Aubrey himself does stress that he doesn't work in longevity. He's not trying to sell immortality. He's working on ending degenerative disease. But he just recognizes that immortality happens to be the side effect of this treatment.
Yeah.
If you end degenerative disease, you live forever. And that's what people get caught up in. And I don't think Aubrey de Grey is too concerned about people getting caught up in the I word.
It's very difficult not to be led down that avenue.
It's very difficult. I mean, that the talks he gives, the conferences and the interviews, that's what it always turns to. With this brave new world where people live for hundreds of years, looking at 25 years old with the good looks and the function and the stamina of a 25-year-old. It's hard to ignore that, and Aubrey Baby totally knows that.
He knows it.
Yeah.
And he might put on what appears to be a facade of exhaustive sort of, I don't want to talk about this, I want to talk about the science of it all, baby, but he knows. He knows exactly where this is.
It's you want to hear about immortality? Oh, that's just a little.
Don't worry
side
about
thing.
that. Yeah.
I didn't think you guys would be interested in immortality.
It's just a side effect of my science.
A forest is a singing bird and all the other creatures that help form the pattern of the wild.
Well, it really is difficult not to be just completely fascinated by the idea of the immortal man and woman. You know, what would a world with immortality for humans look like?
Sure, I mean, like Aubrey might say it's not the point of what he's doing, but in terms of the implications it has on existence and it has on society and the world is immortality.
It'd be massive, wouldn't it? It would change the economy. It would change religion. It would change philosophy. It would change
what
science.
it means to be
goddammit.
human.
Like
Yeah.
the one certainty in life, you know, you die. You know of your mortality. That not being at the back of your mind would just change the way everything runs. It would change. What would that do to, say, like religion? Philosophy is just. Well, I'm reading The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle at the moment by Haruki Murakami.
Nice.
And spoiler alert, there's a scene where the main character is down in a well. And he is being spoken to by a young friend of his, May. I can't remember her last name. And she talks about what would life be without death. And she says basically, without the idea of death at the back of the human mind, things like philosophy, religion, science, everything would change. And complex thoughts such as like what you're going to do with yourself in your brief time on the planet would be non-existent anymore.
Yeah.
With with immortality or with without the thought of death.
It would change what it meant to be alive in the first place. Yeah. It's the way we work as humans, like things like growing up and getting a job and having a mortgage and all that stuff. It all seems to me to be somewhat based on this idea that we're someday going to die and we've got to make the most of it and build up a life and pass on some goodness to our
you got to
children.
leave
Like,
something.
Yeah.
You're no longer stuck with the thought of how you're going to imprint yourself on the world or those around you, because you're not going to die, and no one's going to have to I remember him or whatever. You might die. You might die in a plane crash or something.
Of course. Yeah.
That'd suck.
Yeah. You can still die.
It's not invincibility.
Yeah, it's not invincibility. Like if you fall into a nest of spiders, or if you throw yourself off the top of a very tall flagpole, or if you happen to succumb to whatever other exotic deaths I was about to list, you're still gonna die.
Here's a thought. Does death mean more or less in a world where immortality is an implication?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be more weird when someone dies.
Yeah.
It's funny because at that point in future, it would almost seem like a novelty thing. Like when you look back on the history history like today, and you see those weird things that used to happen to people, like people, I don't know, getting treated for headaches and by holes getting drilled into their skull, or people dying of the plague, and all sorts of things that just are colourful kind of baubles of history now that don't mean very much to us today. Death from degenerative disease and death as a common thing that happened to old people, just and aging would seem silly and strange and outdated.
Yeah.
In a world like that.
I think Aubrey talks about how, people could change vocations every 75 years. Maybe even in a good way for the betterment of, say, the planet, or you could have people who have been lawyers for 75 years who decide, it's probably time for us to devote more time to environmental science, blah, blah, blah. Everybody doesn't have the threat of I've only got one lifetime, I need to devote myself to one thing.
It's a cool idea to think that you could just be several different big occupations throughout your 1,000-year-old lifespan.
Yeah, I was a doctor for a couple of 100 years, and
Yeah.
then I decided, it's probably best that I move on and become a environmental scientist.
So interesting. But I mean, again, that sort of bridges us over to the point that like many things will change in the future, like AI, for instance. By the time we've got humans living to 1,000 years old, AI is going to be better at any contribution any of us can make.
Yeah.
But I mean, we might not have anything to do. If robots and artificial intelligence are the better doctors and the better bakers and the better artists, the better podcast recorders, or the better, I should certainly hope not, are the better everything, then humans, we're going to be living for hundreds of years with nothing fucking to do.
Maybe what we do is drink artificially intelligent created beer.
Yeah.
Smoke artificially
Yeah,
intelligent created smokes.
Sounds alright. For hundreds of years.
For hundreds of years.
Because we do not live alone. To live together is not to take too much, and still accept the gifts the forest gives to us, to all of us.
So now that we've stopped and had a beer and had time to mull over the implications and the possible sociological impacts of immortality.
And we went
for
and got
man.
pizza.
Well, yeah, to put it short, we went and got pizza.
And drank a bit more. But, I mean...
We've really had time to think about it, haven't we?
Mm.
And, it's easy to be led down the typical avenue of political implications for immortality, people holding on to power, rich people having their say and holding on to, or having the power over SENS injections to stay alive forever.
Oh, yeah.
But I think what's really interesting is the sexy implications.
Oh, the sexy implications, exactly. Both of us think that one of the most profound changes of this new world, where people do live for hundreds of years and stay good looking for hundreds of years, I mean, if you're good looking to begin with, that is that that it'll change you personally, it'll change you existentially, it'll change what it means to be alive, which for the ordinary, like, day-to-day person can mean, and for you right now, listener, can mean so much more than, of course these other issues are important too, but this can, I think, mean something on a different plane.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, outside of just the normal changes that come with getting older, in our current situation where we get to the age of 60, 70 and you're a completely different person to what you were when you were 25. You have the thought of how social situations change with people who are 400 interacting with people who are 20.
Yeah, I mean, because they look the same. Like the point of, like one of the effects of what this kind of medical treatment entails is that you don't change your appearance. You don't age. You don't look any old anymore. You reach the height of like your human biological development, which I guess would be around 25, and then you stop aging. You stay looking like that. So a 400-year-old, a 500-year-old, a 1,000-year-old is going to look the same as a bona fide 25-year-old.
Yeah. Even just the funny little things that you think of in normal life where it's, oh man, that 40-year-old guy's going out with a 20-year-old chick, becomes that 500-year-old guy is going out with a 30-year-old chick. Like, what kind of weird freaking world would that become in our perspective anyway? It'd take a long time to get used to it, wouldn't it? But even on a say a personal level, say you were a 400-year-old, it would be strange going out with somebody who's only been alive for 20 years.
You're right. It would
like how strange it would be for a 50-year-old to be going out with like an 18-year-old.
Yeah.
How they're quite immature, obviously, comparatively.
The way you look at life would just be so different.
So different. And that's the one way you would continue to age. I think we said that earlier off air.
Yeah.
That you would continue to age, at least like emotionally.
Yeah, it's a funny thought. Because even you can be totally cool from a physiological point of view. Like, there will be nothing physiologically wrong with your brain because these sense processes, these treatments would be sure of that. They'd get rid of all the crap in there. But your consciousness and your emotions and your experience and your wisdom would still continue to age. And how much of that can you take?
Yeah. Until all the lights go out.
Until all the lights go out. Would you hook up with an 800-year-old?
Now here's the real question: Would I hook up with an 800-year-old?
Hey, that's what everyone's thinking. I'm asking the poignant questions. Say you're 25. They look 25, but they're 800 years old, baby. They would know some moves.
Well, I guess I would suppose that in this realm of existence, that wouldn't be a strange thing. So, probably. But
it would be good, man. They would teach you a thing or two, something you can only know after living on this planet for 800 years.
All sorts of madness. But me right now, that is obviously such a strange idea.
Well, there'd be a skeleton, wouldn't they? or less than that. Dust.
It'd
be random,
the wind.
like atoms, air particles. You may have hooked up with an 800-year-old
already
without knowing.
So many things that we could touch on. So little time.
Certainly we could touch many things, and we would elicit much juice in doing so.
From the touching?
From the touching, yeah. And I mean, I feel like we've, at least from my point of view, we've elicited much figurative juice already. And I'm sitting in this armchair and still basking in the juice of it all. If this technology, this future really is right around the corner, even if it's not 2030, it could be 2040, 2050. It's a lot to think about, a lot to look forward to, whether or not it's a looking forward from a hopeful or concerned sense. It's a lot that's right around the corner, and it's not just going to change what society is like. It's going to change what it means to be human, what it means to be conscious and to be alive and to exist, to live forever.
So, dear listener, sit, stew in the juices, and until this fascinating future arrives, continue listening to the Lapsus Podcast. I'm Julian.
And I'm Billy, and do as Julian offered. Do please continue to stew. And if you have any beautiful thoughts, I would encourage you to share them with us, because we're just as juiced about this as I hope you are. And thank you.
Bye-bye.
See ya.